Hola a todos, soy Javier Poveda y esto es De Bien TV, el canal donde te lo vas a pasar de bien mientras aprendes geografía, historia del arte y este año un poquito de economía y empresariales. Este vídeo va dirigido a mis alumnos de primero de sección CEIPSO, el Encinar de Torrelodones. Bueno, nos lo vamos a pasar de bien siempre y cuando nos dejen los señores de AstraZeneca, porque en menudo viaje me ha metido la primera dosis de la vacuna. Well, so in this video we are going to continue with the prehistory lessons and we are going to finish it with the Unit 8, PIN, which is the Neolithic and the Metal Ages. So let's start with it. So we have already studied the Paleolithic, and now after it, the next period in history or in prehistory is the Neolithic, which started around the year 8000 BC when human beings learned to cultivate the land and to domesticate animals. So it started with the appearance of agriculture and livestock farming, okay? And these innovations led to this new period, Neolithic, which means new stone, o piedra nueva, neolithos, because people developed the technique of polishing stone. Remember that in the Paleolithic, the people of the Paleolithic made their tools by knapping or carving the stone, but in this period they're going to polish the stone. Van a pulir la piedra. And how did they discover this? By observing the nature. For example, when a seed fell in the ground, later after it was watered by the rain, and suddenly a plant grew on that location. So that is why they began with the agriculture mainly with wheat and barley, con el trigo y la cebada. And eventually the best seeds were selected and more abundant harvests were obtained. Okay, so they were smart and they observed which seeds were the most suitable for agriculture. And also they discovered that they could domesticate some of the wild animals they interacted with. So they started to breed them in captivity, criarlos en cautividad. And this was easier than hunting, of course, because it guaranteed a steady supply of meat, milk, leather, and wool, which are the main products that we obtain from the animals. La carne, la leche, el cuero, y la lana. Okay? So, if we look at this timeline, we are now here in the Neolithic, okay, which started in some locations of the world around the year 8000 BC. And at this time, we are going to polish the stone. So, in this period, the human beings changed from predators to food producers, de depredadores a productores. So, since they were able to feed a larger number of people, the population increased because there was more food available, and they use new tools made from polished stone. We have seen that, but there's point we have to know that these changes were not simultaneous in all parts of the world. So the Neolithic did not start at the same time in the same all over the world. One of the earliest Neolithic settlements was in the Fertile Crescent, la creciente fértil, in the Near East, en Oriente Próximo. And from these points and from other points, for example in India or in America, it spread all over the world, and all of these changes are called the Neolithic Revolution. So this is the Crescent Fertile, okay, this part here, the valleys of the river Nile and the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, and from this location it spread, for example, to Europe, okay, but there were some other locations in which Neolithic appeared, for example, the Indus Valley in India, or the Huanghe in China, or in some areas of Central and South America. And this is the most important one, the Fertile Crescent, okay, the valleys of the rivers Tigris, Euphrates, which is Mesopotamia, and the valley of the Nile River. here you have a video of how they polished stone, and these are some of the tools that they made. As you can see here, well, I have this here. Okay, this is an axe made out of polished stone. Okay, you can see this is wood and this is stone, and this is polished. Okay, and they cut it with this. Okay, let's go back here, and most of these new tools, they were used for agricultural purposes. For example, a hoe, una azada, for tilling, para arar, or a sickle, una hoz, for reaping, para segar, or a mill, a hand mill, for milling, para moler, una piedra de moler, para moler. And these developments had consequences. For example, the Neolithic groups abandoned their nomadic way of life and became sedentary. In the Paleolithic they were nomadic, nómadas, and in the Neolithic they became sedentarios. That means that they settled permanently in villages and small settlements. So the appearance of the first villages or the first towns. And one of the, or some of these, the oldest settlements that we know are Jericho or Jericho in Palestine and Cardial in today's Turkey. And they built houses made out of mud, wood, reeds and straw. Okay? Barro, madera, juncos y paja. And the crop fields and animal pens were situated around the village. So they made villages because they have to stay in the same place to look after the crops and to look after the animals. And they built these villages mostly on river banks. We have talked about the valleys of the Tigris, Euphrates and Nile. So they had access to water for drinking and watering the crops. So the land nearest the rivers are, well, and also because the land nearest the rivers is the most fertile. So it's the most suitable for obtaining big harvests. Here, this is, well, Tel Sultan, which is the old Jericho in Palestine. Okay, this is what we have, the remains that we have discovered. And this is how Cardial would look like in this period. Okay, a lot of houses made out of mud, and next to a river, here you have the crop fields and the animals. But not only in these locations, but we have also found some other Neolithic settlements. For example, this one in Skarabrae in Scotland. Okay, this is an oven, by the way. And this is a hut made out of straw in the roof and mud for the walls. Okay, so this society and the economy. So, because of the agricultural production and the livestock, there were new needs that appeared, and craftsmanship, la artesanía, developed to meet these needs. The most important jobs were, were the basket making, la cestería, they made baskets to store grain and food, and also later they made ceramic pots, which led into pottery making, la Ceramica. Also, looms were invented to make clothes. A loom es un telar. And first long threads were spun from flax or wool on a spindle. O sea que los primeros ovillos se hacían sobre todo con la lana, usando la lanzadera del telar. And then these threads were woven together on a loom to make clothes. Okay, so they were like this, so they could make their first clothes made out of a textile fiber, okay, instead of the hides of the animals, instead of the skin of the animals. And looking at the society, the decisions that affected the community were probably made in meetings with all the village inhabitants, some kind of prehistory democracy. And the most valued opinions were those of the elders, the people who are who had the most age, because they were respected for their experience. And in periods of conflict, the military leaders, which are known as chieftains, los jefes militares. This is a map in which you can see the locations where the first plants or crops and animals were domesticated. Okay, all of this, por curiosidad. And this is basket making. Okay, this is a sandal, and these objects were used to store the grain. Okay, that was cultivated. This is pottery. Okay, this is the first ceramic pottery that we know about, and this is a loom. Okay, with this they could make this kind of clothes. And these new discoveries of agriculture and farming influenced the religion. Remember that the first manifestations of religion appeared in the Paleolithic. But now the sun, the water, and the stars were deified, deificados, so worshipped as gods, venerados como dioses, to control the forces of nature. Why? Because the forces of nature, the sun or the rain, they had a lot of influence in the result of the crops and the harvest. Okay, so for example, if there is no rain, the crops die. So that is why they worshipped the forces of nature. And also the burials became more common. Remember that they appeared in the Paleolithic. But now the dead were buried under the houses, so under the floor of the houses, or in necropolises. Okay, a necropolis is the ancient name for a cemetery. Necrópolis, ciudad de los muertos. Outside the settlements, and the families remembered the dead and eventually began to venerate them, which is called ancestor worship. So they venerated their ancestors and the forces of nature. These are, for example, some of these gods from the Cucuteni culture, or let me check something. Okay, or this little idol. Okay, this is a burial, okay, under a house. This is a couple. And this is a necropolis, okay? This is a cemetery in which several burials are located. And after that, after the Neolithic, the Metal Ages started. La edad de los metales o las edades de los metales. And this began, as its name says, when metallurgy was discovered in the Near East, around the year 5000 BC. Okay? Although during the Neolithic period, metal objects were already being used. They knew about the metal, but they did not use it for tools. Okay? In the Neolithic, they continued to use, they used stone, like this, stone tools. But in the moment that they started using metal for their tools, we ran into the Metal Ages. What is metallurgy? Is the technique that consists of heating metals to high temperatures in order to shape them into objects, weapons, adornments or tools. O sea, la metalurgia es la técnica que consiste en calentar el metal para darle la forma que queremos. And there are several techniques for this. Okay, so we are now here in the Metal Ages after the Neolithic, more or less around the year 5000 BC. And we have three periods within the Metal Ages, which are defined by the metal they used. We have copper, bronze, and iron. The first one is the Copper Age, starting more or less, Kirka, remember, approximately on the year 5000 BC, and they first used the technique of forging, la forja, that consists on heating the metal and raising its temperature, and later heating the metal with a hammer, for example, to shape it in the required shape. Okay, But later they smelted the metal, lo fundieron, in an oven and pour it into a mold, lo vierten en un molde, in the shape of the required object, en la forma que necesitan. Si quiero una espada, pues cojo un molde de una espada y vierto ahí el metal fundido. And this is called smelting, la fundición. But copper is not a very strong material, so it was used only for, or mostly for, decorative objects, okay? Because it is useless to make a copper sword, because you hit it and you hit an enemy with it and it breaks up. Later, more or less 2000 years later, around 3000 BC, we have the Bronze Age, because there were some improvements in smelting techniques which led to the creation of an alloy, una aleación, which is a mixture of two metals, copper and tin, cobre y estaño. And the mixture of these two metals makes bronze. And bronze is stronger than copper, so they used it mostly for weapons or armor. And finally, the Iron Age in the first millennium BC, although the first iron tools we have found are more or less from the year 1500 BC, and iron is much stronger even than bronze. So when they used iron for making these objects, mostly weapons, we enter this Iron Age. And the iron is going to be used throughout all the antiquity to make weapons. So here we are, this is a settlement, okay, and this is the smelting process. First they smelted the metal, then they pour it into a mold here, okay, and when it cooled down, they extracted it, then they removed the impurities, they sharpened it, la afilaban, using a polished stone, and finally they attach it to a handle, like this, but this being metal. And here you have some examples. This is a copper axe from Hungary, and this is the Otzi axe, the reconstruction of the Otzi axe. This is Otzi, it's a mummy made out of bronze. Here you have a burial, okay, with this decorative object. We have copper objects and golden objects, as you can see here in Bulgaria. These are the first swords made out of bronze. Or this kopes, which is an Egyptian sword. This is the panoply of Dendra, which is Greek, okay, made out of bronze. This is the cartwheel from the Hallstatt culture, and this is a falcata. These are already from the Iron Age. As you can see, this was much more resistant than the bronze. This is a helmet made out of iron from Korea, okay, because the Metal Ages also developed in every part of the world. And how was the economy here? Well, the discovery of metallurgy led to some developments in agriculture and trade. In agriculture, for example, they made new tools, made stronger tools such as the iron plow. A plow es un arado, okay, and we use it for tilling. So, and also because of the harvests were more abundant, a surplus existed, okay, un excedente, a surplus. And these surplus products were exchanged with the neighboring villages. And this activity is called trade, el comercio. And initially this was done by bartering, which is means that one product was exchanged for another without using money, what we know as trueque, okay. And eventually, when this kind of trade continued on time, the trade routes were established between distant places, and this not only helped to grow the economy, but also to spread all this knowledge, all these customs, and also the religious beliefs. While minerals, tools, weapons, agricultural products, clothes, and luxury articles were exchanged. Those were the goods that were exchanged. And also trade benefited from some of the inventions created in this period. The potter's wheel, el torno de alfarero, the wheel cart, el carro con ruedas, o sea, la rueda, sailboats, los barcos de vela, and maps drawn on clay tablets. This is an iron plow, okay? This is from the Celtic cultures of Northern Europe, but they use it for tilling the fields, okay? This is an example. This is a potter's wheel for making ceramic or pottery, and this is the first evidence that we have that they have discovered the wheel. Here, this is a cart, okay, with the 4 wheels here in a pot. And this is the first, or the oldest remain we have of a cart with wheels, okay? This one here, this is the first ship or boat we have, we know about, okay, from Northern Europe. And this is the reconstruction of an Egyptian sailboat, because it uses the power of the wind. And this is the first map, also we know, which is a Mesopotamian map drawn on a clay tablet. This is Babylonian, this is the Euphrates, and okay, we will see that in the next unit. Society. The populations of the villages grew because of their prosperity and became towns, and more resistant materials were used for these buildings. For example, adobe, which is a mixture of mud and straw. El adobe, barro y paja. And also stone. And the increase of agricultural production meant that some people could stop working in the fields and dedicate themselves to other tasks. This marks the beginning of the division of labor, de la división del trabajo. Why? Because if you can purchase your food in the market, you can trade food by or in exchange of some objects you can do, you don't need to work in the fields. So that is the reason why the labor started to be divided, because some people were peasants, some people work in the livestock, and some other people could work in other jobs, for example, the craftsmanship, okay? And the increasing wealth, this increasing prosperity led to sackings, okay? So attacks from other towns to steal your wealth. That is why most of these settlements in the Middle Ages were surrounded by palisades, which is a wooden wall, or stone walls, okay? And the most powerful position here was held by the chieftain, because the increase of importance of the military leaders, and these chieftains eventually developed into kings when this power was inherited by their sons. So this is the birth of the monarchies in the Middle Ages. We have some examples of these walls, la Cultura de los Millares en Almería, okay? These are the foundations of the walls, and these are huts made out of adobe, barro y paja, remember. And finally, the art. And the most important artistic manifestations of the Middle Ages are the Megalithism, okay? The megalithic monuments, which were made of enormous blocks of stones, which are called megaliths. Megalitos, gran piedra. And which were placed on their own or arranged together to form a structure. What are their purposes? Well, they have several purposes. For example, funerary, like tombs; commemorative, to mark an important event, like today; territorial, to mark the boundaries, the borders, the frontiers; and even astronomical, for example, to mark the change in the seasons. And it is true that the first megaliths appeared in the Neolithic, but they developed a lot during the Middle Ages. And there are several types of megaliths. We have here these ones, menhir, which is a large stone pushed in the ground. It's a big vertical stone, okay, in the ground. We have also dolmens, which are various megaliths, one in vertical and one in horizontal, which have the form of a table of the number P, for example. And also we have these more complex structures called cromlechs, okay, which are various megaliths usually forming a circle. This is Stonehenge in England. And this is how they built them. They transported the stone with logs, this one, troncos, and ropes, cuerdas, and then they lift stones into a standing position using ramps, this, and lower them into a hole in the ground using a lever, this, una palanca. And finally they moved the lintel is the upper part of the megalith, into position, like this, using a ramp. Okay, this is how they made it. And now we have to take a closer look to the cultures, these cultures of the Metal Ages in the Iberian Peninsula. And they are characterized by the type of pottery they used and the burial customs they also used. So this is the map of the locations of these cultures that we are going to see now. And we have to know them in or with their Spanish name, porque me niego a dar la historia de España en inglés, así lo digo. So, in the first one of the Neolithic reached the Iberian Peninsula 2,000 years later than in the Crescent Fertile, okay? In the 6th millennium BC, so around the year 6000 BC. And the first culture we have is la cultura de la cerámica cardial, which emerged in Levante, in the east of the Iberian Peninsula, and was characterized by the imprints of cells on the pottery. This is the typical pot from this culture, okay? It is called Cardial because they use this type of cell to imprint the adornments on the pot. Esto se llama cardium, por eso se llama la cultura de la cerámica cardial. And this pottery have these characteristic incisions, okay, using this type of cells, el cardium. We also have in the Neolithic la cultura de los sepulcros de fosa, mainly in Catalonia. Why? Because the corpses were buried in holes in the ground with stone sides. Okay, here the stones have been removed, but here we still have some of them. Okay, they made a hole in the ground and they surrounded it with stones. That is why they are called los sepulcros de fosa. Later, in the Metal Ages, we have first in the Copper Age, which is between the year 3000 and 1700 BC, we have la cultura del vaso campaniforme, or the bell beaker, pero es que a mí decir bell beaker, hablando de esto, pues me da angustia. Por eso, cultura del vaso campaniforme. And the pots were shaped like an inverted bell. Por eso se llama así, vaso campaniforme, vaso con forma de campana, campana invertida. Okay? If you turn this around, upside down, it looks like a bell. That is why it is called la cultura del vaso campaniforme from the Copper Age. And also, la cultura de los millares, sobre todo en la zona del sureste, in the southeast of Spain, mostly Almería. And its most characteristic construction is the corridor dolmen, el dolmen de corredor. A collective tomb consisting of a passageway and a bigger chamber covered with stones. These are a lot of dolmen. Este es el dolmen de Antequera, o el dolmen de Menga, que está en Antequera, Málaga, ¿vale? And these are a lot of dolmens put one after the other, as you can see here, vertical stones and horizontal stones. And they made a corridor, and this was used for funerary purposes. Y esta es la cultura de los millares. Later, in the Bronze Age, we have la cultura del Argar, also in Almería, with settlements built in high places and producing this type of dark ceramics. Okay? And they also buried it there under the floors of their houses. This is an example of, this is el Argar, which is a Bronze Age settlement. And maybe the most characteristic one of the Bronze Age is la cultura talayótica, que se da en las Islas Baleares, which is a megalithic culture that constructed this type of specific megaliths. Taulas, this kind of megaliths in the shape of a T. Navetas, this one, okay, mostly, or they probably use it for funerary purposes. And talayots, that's why their name is talayótica. This is a talayot, which we think that they use this as a watchtower, como una atalaya, ¿no? Para ver a los enemigos que vienen por ahí. And finally, in the Iron Age, the first millennium BC, we have the three main cultures that later encountered the Carthaginians and the Romans. We have the Celts in the north and west of the peninsula, which brought the iron knowledge to the Iberian Peninsula and built fortified settlements called castros. ¿Okay? Este es un castro que está en Galicia, por ejemplo, de Santa Tecla, si no me equivoco. Famosísimos, a lo mejor habéis estado. And then we have the Iberians and the Celtiberians. The Iberians in the area of Levante and the south, and the Celtiberians in the middle of the Peninsula Ibérica. Los íberos y los celtíberos, vaya. Okay? And, well, this is a settlement from, this is a Iberian, no, esto es Numancia, creo. No me acuerdo. And also, we have to know that during this Iron Age, the first half of the first millennium, we have the first Phoenician and Greek colonies in the Iberian Peninsula. The Phoenician colonies mostly in the south, and the Greeks mostly in the Mediterranean coast. Okay, the most important was Rhodes and Emporion. Ampurias, which is this city that you have here. Okay, and they established relations with the Iberians because they were settled in the Iberian territory, and passed on numerous advances to them, such as writing, because the Iberians learned to write, and this will mark the end of the prehistory in the Iberian Peninsula and the entrance in the ancient history. Later, the Romans came, but we will see that in the next units. And that's it. Y os dejo con el tesoro del carambolo que está en el Museo Arqueológico Nacional, ahí en la Plaza de Colón, y que tiene los tartésicos o tartesos, era un pueblo también legendario, estas culturas que existían en el suroeste de la península ibérica. Y es muy bonito ir al Museo Arqueológico, que mola un montón. Bueno, 32 minutos de vídeo, pero es que he ido un poquito despacito porque estoy reventado de la vacuna. Pero bueno, espero que este vídeo os haya servido, ¿vale? Y que os haya ayudado. Cualquier duda ya sabéis que me la podéis consultar por correo, por el aula virtual o por mis redes sociales. Así que muchas gracias por verlo. Si te has quedado al final de 32 minutazos, eres mi ídolo. Y si no, pues ya habrá represalias. Nada, es mentira. Muchas gracias, un abrazo y nos vemos en el próximo.